Hi guys, this is Erica from Gokce Capital. Now before I begin, be sure to click subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Supreme Court Justice Stewart famously said, "I can't define it, but I know it when I see it." He was speaking, of course, about pornography, but this may very well describe the attitude that many land buyers have towards wetlands. You may not be able to quote the scientific definition of a wetland, but you will know wet soil when you see it, right? After all, there's nothing complicated about moisture. But this attitude doesn't solve the case of Dr. Karen Vaughn's uniquely dark wetland soil. But more on that later. For now, if you are looking to purchase land, here are the top things you should know about hydric soils, including why they matter to you. Number 1, hydric soils are soils saturated long enough during the growing season to develop anaerobic conditions in the upper part. In other words, hydric soils are soils that are frequently flooded or ponded for a long enough duration during the growing season to develop anaerobic conditions. Number 2, anaerobic conditions means that the soil must lack oxygen for sufficient time to support water-loving plants. Most soils are aerobic, meaning that they have oxygen within them, and the vast majority of plants require this oxygen-rich soil to survive. But there are a few unique plants, or water-loving hydric plants, that grow in soils without oxygen. Now, if we return to the definition of hydric soils, we know that the anaerobic conditions must be in the upper part. What this means is that the biological activity in the soil occurs near the soil surface. This is important because when the biological activity is in the upper part of the soil surface, only a short period of wetness is needed to use up all of the oxygen and create anaerobic conditions. Number 3, another key part of the definition of hydric soils is that the saturation occurs during the growing season. So this is to say that during the period when plants are going to grow, the soil is anaerobic and flooded, which is what creates the conditions that allow water-loving plants to grow. The growing season is the portion of the year when soil temperatures are above biologic zero, or 41 degrees Fahrenheit, at a depth of 19.7 inches. Different soil taxonomies have different assumed growing months, and you can find more information on these assumed months at the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service website. Number 4, hydric soils are important because they are one of the 3 indicators that wetlands are present. And it's important to know whether wetlands are present as a land buyer because there are laws that protect wetlands and restrict building on them. In fact, we did a video on this topic that you may want to check out. Number 5, it's also important to know whether wetlands exist in an area because they play an important role in the environment overall. They are a critical habitat for rare and endangered species of flora and fauna, but from a human standpoint, they're very important because they're one of nature's greatest filtration systems, and they're often the front line in making sure that pollution is filtered out of water before we use it. They also retain nutrients and serve as a vital ecosystem. And part of why a wetland ecosystem is vital is because it is a great barrier for flooding. And when wetlands are present, they can help protect developed areas from excessive inundation. They are also a valuable recreation space. Many people love wetlands because they are a great habitat for fishing, and they are home to a number of waterfowl that are preferred by many hunters. But even if you are not a hunter or a fisher, there are great spots for canoeing and wildlife viewing. Number 6, you may think that hydric soils are fairly easy to identify. After all, you just need to know whether they are saturated and wet for a substantial time period. But it's actually a little more complicated than that. There are a number of field indicators that must be present in order to confirm the presence of hydric soil. These indicators are listed out in the USDA's Field Indicators of Hydric Soils in the United States. And this document is the sole approved source for hydric soil identification and delineation by all federal agencies involved in wetlands conservation. Number 7, there are a number of field indicators that confirm the presence of hydric soils, but some of the biggest ones include iron, reduction, transformation, and differential accumulation, as well as carbon accumulation and differential decomposition. These are a little more technical, so you don't need to know exactly what this means, but essentially they are biochemical indicators that suggest that anaerobic conditions have been created. Physical indicators include the presence of organic soils, or a layer of muck that is saturated for 30 consecutive days during the growing season. Also, the presence of hydrogen sulfide, or that classic rotten egg smell. Hydric soils have a unique color, typically a light gray, and hydric soils often contain iron or manganese concentrations, or spots that look like rust in the soil. Now, all of these indicators are very technical, so delineating a wetlands is not something that you can do on your own. If you want to determine definitively whether hydric soils or wetlands exist on your property, you will want to hire a professional to complete a wetlands delineation. And number 8, if you want to do a quick check on your own to see whether it's likely that your property has hydric soils, the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service produces a national list of hydric soils. So you can check this list to see if your property is on it. Although you should just note that just because the soil is present on this list doesn't mean the soil is in fact hydric. The list is an interpretive rating, and it's created based on published soil surveys and other estimated soil properties. Therefore, it does not replace a wetlands delineation. But if you know that you do not want to buy a property with wetlands on it, and you find that the property is on the hydric soils list, you can pass on the property and avoid spending extra money on due diligence. But let's return to the mystery of Dr. Karen Vaughn's uniquely dark wetland soil. As we mentioned earlier, one of the key characteristics of hydric soil is its pale, light grayish color. Yet the deep, rich, greenish-blue color of the soil in one particular wetland canyon along the central coast of California was troubling Dr. Vaughn. All other indicators suggested the area was a wetland. The soil itself was damp and there was plenty of water-loving vegetation, but the soil looked almost exactly like nearby drier soil. So what was going on? Was this area not, in fact, a wetland? Well, as it turns out, the canyon was surrounded by steep cliffs, and landslides were common in the area. The landslides caused soils from drier areas to mix with the wetland soil, transferring the darker color even as the entire soil complex became saturated. And this is one example of why classifying hydric soils can be more complicated than one would think, and why you need a professional to complete a delineation. But when buying vacant land, it may be best to fall back on Justice Stewart's axiom. If you know a wetland when you see it, perhaps it is best to avoid it. But do you have any stories about wetlands, wetland delineation, or hydric soils? Let us know in the comments. Did you like this video? You're going to love our Gokce Land Due Diligence program. We'll make you a land due diligence expert in just 7 days. Check it out at gokcecapital.com/glad. And while you're at our website, don't forget to explore our $1 down listings at gokcecapital.com/listings. Finally, don't hesitate to reach out. You can email, call, or text, and we will respond as soon as possible. So thank you for listening, and more to come.